Hello, friends, and welcome to Wisdom's Way, where we explore timeless biblical principles that shape faithful living. Hello, I'm Tim Pollock, and I'm the founder of Wisdom's Way Publications, as well as senior pastor of the home church in Lodi, California. And today, we're continuing our journey about a question that is really gets down to the very core of who we are and what we feel, and that is this: should I tithe, or why do I tithe? And so I felt like, and over the years I've tithed, and so I laid out 10 reasons, biblical reasons why I tithe. And so we have discussed those up to this point, and on this podcast I would like to finish those 10 by giving 8, 9, and 10. All right, number 8. I tithe because I long to be a good example. You know, in the Christian life, as we grow in commitment, we also grow in our responsibility. As a young man, as a young worker, and then I was on staff at a church, a husband, a father, and then a pastor, the weight of responsibility each year increased. With it came a desire. I desperately wanted to be a good example. The words of Paul that he told Timothy in 1 Timothy 4 and verse 2, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers." Be thou an example of the believers. Let me say that again. Be an example of the believers in word and conversation, in charity and spirit and faith and purity. Do you want people to live like you? Do you think other Christians should be like you? The Bible says we are an example in faith. Few things are and require faith any more than giving 10%. And God said we should be an example in faith. Be an example, especially in my children, was vital to me. Honestly, I don't think I could look into the eyes of my children knowing that their dad was not honoring God. Occasionally, people ask me the question. They said, well, you're a minister, you're a pastor, and since your salary comes from the church, do you tithe? And the answer is yes, absolutely. I've always tithed. And by God's grace, I give him glory for his strength. Not only do I tithe, but I give offerings above the tithe. One of the reasons I do that is not only because I feel like it's biblical and right, I do it to be a good example, to not only to my family, but to others. I wouldn't want them to ask them to do something that I wouldn't do myself. There are many Bible examples of people who gave and became great examples to the faith. Abraham and Jacob and Nehemiah. Abraham, it says in Genesis 14, he gave tithes to Melchizedek, the high priest. Abraham honored God as the possessor of heaven and earth, it says in verse 19 of that chapter. His example still speaks today. He said, God is the one I honor by giving tithes and offerings to Melchizedek. This wasn't under the law. This was way before that. Jacob followed that same model in Genesis 28 and verse 22. Of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee. Why did he do that? It is a Bible principle to give the 10th. Later, when tithing was neglected, the temple was in disrepair, worship crumbled. Nehemiah saw that the Levites had to go back out to the field for survival. They had to go out and start working because there was no support in Nehemiah 13 and verse 10. So he called his nation on the carpet. He corrected the thing. He restored tithing, and God favored them once again. The lesson is clear. Tithing isn't automatic. It has to be taught. It has to be exampled clearly, biblically, without apology. I've never felt bad about speaking about tithing. Now, I must admit, in days like we live in even right now, where it's difficult for people to um, make ends meet, even that's the case. Still, tithing is an act of faith. And if you wait till you have money, that's never going to come. A grandfather once gave his grandson a cup full of coins. It was over $30. They decided that he would give a tenth of that to the church, and then he would give a 10% to his savings, and then the rest would be for his personal spending. And so the boy had a little church bank, that he could put quarters in it, and so that he began dropping those little coins in that little church bank. And then for each coin that he dropped in, it was the saddest little voice. He said, "Bye-bye, bye-bye, bye-bye." It was killing him to put that money in that little church bank, and it was gone. Even though an hour earlier he had nothing. It was all given to him, and yet giving a part of it to God, it was just making him so difficult for him. But that's human nature. We have to be taught to do right. That grandfather did a great thing in teaching that little boy that, look, you're going to get this, but you need to make sure that you give the tithe to the Lord. We have to be taught to do the right thing. A man was warned that there was a deadly snake in his house. He was reminded and urged deeply that he must kill it. However, the snake left gold every day, and so the man tolerated it. Then the snake bit his horse, but he tolerated it because he left gold. And then the snake bit his servant. Then his son, but even then he realized, well, at least it left some gold. And then it bit his wife. Each time the gold soothed his conscience. Eventually the snake bit him too. You see, the snake of greed doesn't stop, and it will keep biting. And yes, you have gold, but what good is it if we die? It's a picture to me of what greed does. It pays you just enough to keep you blind until it destroys what matters so most. And so then there is a ninth reason why I give tithes to the Lord, and that is I tithe because I acknowledge God's ownership. This matter is called stewardship. When I first heard the doctrine of stewardship, it was a light bulb moment for me. A steward is simply a manager. That means I'm not the owner of my money. All of the money I have, regardless of how I got it, whether it was given to me, whether I worked for it, whatever way it came, I'm the manager of God's money. Here's what the psalmist said in Psalm 50 and verse 10. "For every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle upon 1,000 hills." God said, that beast that's in the forest? It's mine. That cattle that you own that's out there in the field? That's mine. By the way, just so you know, I own the hills too. God owns it all. Every dollar is God's. Every penny is God's. I'm just his manager. Luke gave us a very clear warning about this matter. Luke 16:1. There was a rich man who had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. The point being, Jesus said, a steward can waste what wasn't his. It's God's. So stewardship means I do with God's money what he wants me to do, and I don't waste it. What are you doing with God's money? Jacob in the Old Testament had this wonderful moment where he gave tithes. It was his Bethel moment. It was Genesis 28. Jacob was fleeing home. Life was fearful. It was uncertain. And it wasn't really what you'd call a perfect beginning in life. But at that very crossroads, he met God. And the response was not just something in his heart, it was tangible. Genesis 28 and verse 22. Of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. He made that tithe like a pillar, a visible reminder that everything I have came from God. He made a pillar there. He erected a pillar there to remind him it's all God's. It reminds me of something that happened in our family one day. One of my children said, "Dad, can I have some money? But I'd like a little more this time." I was intrigued by what they wanted because typically we had a small little allowance, but he wanted a little more. "Why?" I said. He was a little bit sheepish and kicking it around. Finally, he admitted he wanted to buy me a Father's Day present. Now think about that. He wanted money from me to give back to me. To me, that's a beautiful picture of tithing. Lord, give me, give me, give me, so that I can give back. I can give to others and I can give to him. God doesn't need the money, but he does love the response that's given back to him. It is a wonderful thing when we are grateful that he is the one who is the provider. Tithing teaches us to fear God. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 23 says that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. Tithing trains the heart to remember God is the supplier of everything. In London, England, if you were to go there and look at the Royal Exchange, you would find the words of Psalm 24 and verse 1. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Now, many people believe that in theory, but deny it in practice. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 12, verse 21. Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Render means to give back. So our giving to God is giving back. It says render. That means it's his. Give it back to him. Caesar has some of our money. It's his money. The great author of the wonderful song that we sing, I Surrender All. It reminds us that when Jesus surrendered all, he gave his life. So really, when you think about it, when he asks us to surrender some of our money back to him, it's nothing compared to what he gave. I love remembering the story of William Colgate, and I believe his story beautifully illustrates stewardship. When he was a young man, an old neighbor urged him, "Here's what I encourage you to be, William. Be a good man. Give your heart to Christ and give the Lord the portion of every dollar. Make an honest soap, give a full pound." And so Colgate began his career by following those bits of advice. And he gave the Lord the first dollar he earned. He told his bookkeeper, open an account with the Lord. 1/10 of all he made went into that account. And as his business grew over the years, he began to give 2/10, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, until eventually he was giving nearly the entire amount of his income to the Lord. Now, whether you or I agree with every detail of how he did that, the principle still stands. His testimony was rooted in the fact that God owned everything. That principle right there transformed my giving. Then the 10th reason, and this reason really is close to my heart, and that is I tithe because I want God's power for ministry. Ultimately, the bigger question isn't just should I tithe, but who's first in my life? Is Jesus first? As a young man, my desire to serve God was all-consuming, and I realized that stewardship was part of being a faithful servant for the God. Titus chapter 1 and verse 7 says a bishop, that means a pastor. A bishop, overseer is what it literally means, but a bishop must be blameless as the steward of God. If you're going to serve God in ministry, your private world must be in order. And I've learned this over the decades. Those who compromise biblical obedience never walk in spiritual power. When I'm fudging in my devotional life, my ministry lacks power. Inner order affects outer anointing. Tithing is something that gives us power. And the wonderful thing about tithing is it lets anybody serve Jesus. You may not be able to sing on key. You may not have the strength that you used to have so that you can do physical ministry. But everybody can give. Every young person can serve God through giving. Every older person can serve God through giving. Every mom who maybe not be able to get outside the home like she would maybe like to, she can serve God through giving. Every dad who wishes maybe he had more time to be out doing mission work, he can always serve God through giving, being a steward. In the Bible, it says that there are windows of heaven. The book of Malachi, chapter 3, talks about the windows of heaven. The Hebrew word there, aruba, points to the idea of a floodgate, a sluice gate. Picture a dam across a massive river. The water is backed up. It's held in reserve. When the little gates open, the sluice gates open, a torrent rushes out. As it rushes out, it turns generators, and that power goes to distant places. That image reflects what happens when God's people obey. Systematic giving opens gates, and power is generated for ministry. Spiritual resources are often held in reserve until the faith of that person opens up the gates. Why would anybody want to live closed up to what God would do in their life? There's an old story from Tolstoy that I believe fits here. He told of a man who could have all the land that he wanted as long as he could walk around it from sunrise to sunset. And as long as he returned before sundown, he could have all the land that he walked around. This man pushed farther and farther and farther. Greed drove him to push. And as the sun dropped, he began running desperately. And then he collapsed at the finish line, dead. And the question returns to all of us. Do you want power? Do you want prosperity? Do you want real living? Jesus said, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul? Now, you'd say, well, Pastor, I feel convinced. I feel touched by God. I should do this. How do I start? Well, I can tell you, you don't have to be a great person or a rich person. Some people say, well, I'll start when I have a little bit of money. Well, you'll never start then because very few of us ever always have everything we want. You do have to start. Let me give you two things that will help. Number one, your convictions must be deeper than your feelings. Insight without action goes poof. Hearing without doing produces no change. It must become a settled conviction. You must have the feeling, regardless, we will tithe. As Jacob said in Genesis 28 and verse 22, I will surely give the tithe. I will surely give. Conviction. Is it what you're going to do? Then number two, your practice must be greater than your intentions. Tithing never happens just haphazardly. You've got to have a plan. Now, I'm a firm believer that you're not going to be able to tithe unless you know how to budget yourself. And I'm a firm believer in restricted allocation budgeting, meaning, or sometimes I call it cookie jar. Imagine putting 6 cookie jars or 7 or 8 cookie jars along here, and then You take your paycheck, you put $20 in each cookie jar. One cookie jar says tithe, the other cookie jar says taxes, the other says food and housing. There's one that says utilities and transportation, and then other things, just basic living expenses. Now, you just put it in there, and it's restricted to that. You can't change it. It's designated. You can't take out of one and put it in the other. When you restrict it, then that's the way it goes. Now, there are 4 priorities that you start with. Number 1, tithe. That's God first. That's just it. So if you could only have 4 cookie jars, then that's what you start with. The tithe, and then taxes. We're required by law to do that, whether you like it or not. Nobody likes it, but you put the tithe in. If you have a wage, you probably have the tithe already or taxes taken out. The third priority, and really this is one of the basics of life, the basic maybe, is food. You got to have food for yourself, food for your family. I mean, technically, I guess you could live in a tent somewhere, but then the second one, or the second necessity would be housing. So tithe, taxes, food, and housing. And that actually matches what Paul said when he said, having food and raiment, we're content. That's the basics of life. People say, well, once I get ahead, I'll start tithing. That day is never coming. In fact, I've noticed that God often allows it to be difficult at the first, so that only those who truly believe will obey. The rest will wait forever until somehow it gets easy. But people who are full of faith step up and do it. John Rockefeller, one of the richest men who ever lived, said he began tithing as a boy, making $1.50 a week because his mother asked him to give the tenth. He said this, he said, if I had never tithed on the first dollar I made, I would have never tithed on the first million. Train your children to tithe. Proverbs 3 verses 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. Well, friend, tithing is not about making the church rich. It's about putting Christ first. It's about acknowledging God's ownership. It's about opening the gates of power for ministry. It's about living with conviction and not excuses. It's not a system. It's personal. It's doing something for Jesus. It's worship. It's example. It is love in motion. If you have been withholding God's tithe, why not make it right with your dearest friend you could ever have, Jesus Christ? Why not walk down to the altar and start honoring him from this day forward? Well, I'm Tim Pollock, and this has been Wisdom's Way. Until next time, walk with God, live by faith, and my friend, I hope you'll walk in wisdom and keep your heart open and soft by keeping your hand open as well. God bless.